Sit down somewhere else, old man. This one's taken. The voice came from the aisle seat of row 7, loud enough to carry 3 rows in each direction, laced with the bored entitlement of someone who had never once been told that the world did not organize itself around his convenience. The man who said it was sprawled across the middle and aisle seats simultaneously, his carry-on occupying the overhead bin above a window seat he had not paid for, one leg extended into the aisle, a wireless earbud in one ear and the other dangling from his collar. His name was Brandon Kelsey, and he was 34 years old, and he had the look of a man in the kind of sales job that rewards aggression, square jaw, expensive watch. A button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow in a way that communicated he was a person who made things happen. The seat he had colonized was 7B. The boarding pass in his hand said 12C. The man standing in the aisle looking at him was 82 years old. His name was Colonel Harold Fitch, retired, United States Air Force, though nothing about his appearance announced any of that. He wore a plain blue Oxford shirt, the kind sold in the men's section of department stores in 3 packs, tucked into dark slacks with a crease that had survived the morning. His shoes were black and clean. He carried a single small bag that he held with both hands, and those hands, mapped with the geography of 8 decades, the knuckles prominent, the skin thin and mottled at the wrist, were perfectly, completely still. He had in his breast pocket a boarding pass that said 7B. He looked at Kelsey with eyes the color of a winter sky at altitude, pale gray blue, clear, possessing the particular depth of a man who had spent a significant portion of his life looking at large distances from great heights, where the world resolves itself to essentials. He did not argue. He did not perform indignation. He simply stood in the aisle with the stillness of a man who had learned, at some point so far back he couldn't name it, that most turbulence was not worth fighting, and that the turbulence worth fighting did not look like this. "I believe that's my seat," he said. His voice was unhurried, the dry, even rasp of a man for whom economy of language was not a style but a habit laid down over 60 years. "Row 7B. I've got it on my boarding pass." Kelsey looked up at him with the slow blink of someone who does not intend to be moved. "And I'm comfortable. Find another seat." He turned back to his phone. The flight was a regional connector, a Key RJ 700 running from Charlotte to Nashville on a Tuesday morning in March, booked full. There were no other aisle seats available, Harold knew, because he had checked at the gate, where the gate agent had confirmed it. The plane was small enough that every word carrying in it arrived at every ear. 3 rows back, a young mother with a toddler on her lap was watching. Across the aisle, a man in a UPS uniform looked at the ceiling with the deliberate neutrality of someone who did not want to be involved. A college-age woman in the row behind Kelsey had lowered her phone. Kelsey was not finished. He had clocked the attention and decided to use it. "Look," he said, not looking up from his phone, pitching his voice for the cabin. "I've been traveling since 4 this morning. I have a window seat 3 rows back that you are welcome to. It's a 45-minute flight. Do yourself a favor and don't make this a thing." He finally looked up, directly at Harold, with the expression of a man conferring a mercy. "At your age, you probably want to sit down anyway. So sit down. Just not here." Harold looked at him for a moment. The cabin smelled of recycled air and stale coffee and the particular synthetic warmth of a aircraft that has been in service long enough to have absorbed the collective anxiety of thousands of flights. Outside the oval windows, the Charlotte tarmac was flat and gray under a thin March overcast, fuel trucks moving in the distance, the windsock at the far end of the field barely stirring. The plane shuddered faintly as a luggage cart bumped the fuselage somewhere beneath them. I'll stand here, Harold said quietly, until the flight attendant sorts it out. Kelsey's jaw tightened. He looked around the cabin, performing exasperation for whatever audience was paying attention, which was, by now, most of it. Unbelievable, he said, loud enough for the front 5 rows. Absolutely unbelievable. Guy can't just take a seat. He shook his head. What are you, a veteran? You want special treatment? This isn't the VA. Pops, Harold said nothing. 2 rows back, a flight attendant named Dara Simmons had been watching since the moment Harold reached row 7. She was 38, had been flying for 11 years, had seen this particular brand of territorial cabin behavior more times than she could count, and had developed a finely calibrated instinct for the difference between a situation that would resolve itself and one that required her to become the resolution. She was already moving up the aisle. "Sir," she said to Kelsey, pleasantly but without warmth, "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass." She looked at Harold's. She looked at Kelsey's. She confirmed what both documents said. "Sir, your assigned seat is 12C. This gentleman has 7B. I'm going to need you to move." Kelsey looked at her with the expression of a man encountering an unreasonable bureaucratic obstacle. "I had this seat on the last flight. The system must have changed it. Can you just check? The system assigned you 12C, Dara said. This seat belongs to this passenger. I need you to move now, or I'll need to have a conversation with the captain." Kelsey moved. He made a production of it, gathering his things with the theatrical inconvenience of a man being deeply wronged, making sure the cabin understood the injustice being visited upon him. His carry-on scraping the overhead bin, a significant sigh deployed at the aisle. He stopped beside Harold as he passed. "Enjoy your seat, Grandpa," he said, low enough to be private, contemptuous enough to land. He walked back to 12C. Harold settled into 7B. He placed his bag under the seat in front of him and folded his hands in his lap and looked out the window at the tarmac. His expression had not changed since he entered the aircraft. Dara Simmons completed the boarding process, conducted the safety demonstration, and took her jump seat for takeoff. The carriage lifted off from Charlotte at 9:14 a.m., climbing through the thin overcast into the flat white light above it, and the cabin settled into the particular suspension of a short regional flight where no one fully commits to anything because it will be over before it starts. At cruising altitude, Dara moved forward through the cabin with the beverage cart. When she reached Harold, she poured his coffee without being asked. He had not asked for anything, and set it in front of him. And then she did something she had not planned to do when she woke up that morning. She leaned down slightly. "Sir," she said, quietly, "I'm sorry about that. That shouldn't have happened." Harold looked up at her. "It happens," he said. "You handled it well." She smiled, started to move on, then stopped. "Can I ask, the bag?" She nodded at the small carry-on under the seat. On the side of it, barely visible, was a worn patch, an embroidered design that she had noticed when he boarded, blue and gold and red, the kind of insignia that meant something specific to someone. "Are you military?" "Was," he said. "Air Force. A long time ago." She nodded, starting to move on again. "Then, what did you fly?" Harold looked out the window at the clouds below them. There was something in the way he looked at them, not nostalgic exactly, more proprietary, the way a man looks at a place he has been in a way most people have not. "Everything they'd give me," he said. And then, after a pause so brief she almost missed it, eventually, the F-86. Then, the Century series. F-100 to start. Ended on the F-105. Dara went still for a moment. She was not a military historian, but she was a woman who had grown up near Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, whose father had been an Air Force mechanic, and she knew enough to understand that the aircraft types Harold had named did not add up to a mild service record. She knew enough to understand that the F-105 Thunderchief had flown exactly one theater in one war, and that the men who flew it over that particular theater had done so with a casualty rate that was, by any accounting, extraordinary. She excused herself quietly, walked to the forward galley, and picked up the aircraft interphone. She called the cockpit. Captain Reed Mallory answered on the second ring. 39 years old, commercial aviation 15 years, Air Force Reserve before that, 3 years flying F-16s out of Shaw. His first officer, Lieutenant Amara Chukwu, was 31, Air Force active duty reserves, had cross-trained to commercial 2 years prior. Captain, Dara said, I have a passenger in 7B. Retired Air Force. I need you to hear his name. She paused. Harold Fitch. The silence in the cockpit lasted 4 seconds. Reed Mallory's hand, which had been resting on the center console, went still. Say again, he said. His voice had changed frequency, not louder, tighter, the way a wire tightens when current runs through it. Harold Fitch, Dara repeated. He's 82. He flew F-105s. Another silence. Beside Mallory, Amara Chukwu had turned from the instrument panel. Dara, Mallory's voice was very controlled now. Is he all right? Is he comfortable? He's fine. There was a seat issue. It's been resolved. I just thought you should know. Understood. A pause. Dara, can you do something for me? Can you offer him whatever he needs? Anything at all. Another pause. And tell him the cockpit would like to speak with him when it's operationally appropriate. If he's willing. She hung up and looked at the phone for a moment. In the cockpit, Reed Mallory looked at Amara Chukwu. She was already looking at him. You know the name? She said. Yes, he said. Tell me. Mallory looked back at the instrument panel, the flat cloud cover below them, the late morning light through the cockpit glass. Harold Fitch flew 105 missions in the F-105 Thunderchief over North Vietnam between 1966 and 1967. Wild Weasel missions. You know what that means. Chukwu nodded. Wild Weasel. The mission profile that existed for one purpose, fly directly at surface to air missile sites to draw their radar lock, exposing the SAM battery so that other aircraft could destroy it. The pilot, in operational terms, was the bait. The casualty rate for Wild Weasel crews in that theater was the highest of any USAF mission category in the Vietnam War. He was shot down twice, Mallory continued, his voice even and quiet, the tone of someone recounting something they have spent time with. Came back both times. Second time, he ejected at low altitude over Hanoi, evaded for 4 days, was extracted by a search and rescue team under direct fire. The rescue crew took fire the entire extraction. He paused. He holds the Air Force Cross. 2 distinguished flying crosses. He was nominated for the Medal of Honor after the second shootdown. The nomination was downgraded due to classification restrictions on the mission. He paused again. The men in his wing called him the Ghost Rider, not because he was flashy, because no matter what they threw at him, he came back. In 2 tours, his wing lost 11 aircraft. He brought his back every time. He looked at the clouds below them, white and indifferent. 11 aircraft, Amara, the loss rate on Wild Weasel in 67 was 1 in 3. You flew 3 missions and statistically, you didn't come home from one of them. He flew 105. Chukwu was quiet for a long moment. The autopilot held the aircraft steady at 28,000 feet, the engine note constant and low, the flat Tennessee landscape beginning to resolve itself beneath the cloud cover far below. He's sitting in row 7, she said. Yes, Mallory said. And someone took his seat. Mallory's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. Something that resolved, quietly and completely, into a decision. "Contact Nashville approach," he said. "Tell them we need a courtesy coordination. I want to make a radio call in the cabin on descent." He straightened slightly in his seat. "And find out if there's anyone from the 4th Fighter Wing on the ground at Na today." There was not anyone from the 4th Fighter Wing. There were, however, 2 F-35 pilots from the 158th Fighter Wing out of Burlington, Vermont, currently on the ground at Nashville International for a coordination visit, Captain Jesse Park and First Lieutenant Danny Osei, who were in the terminal when Nashville Approach relayed the courtesy call request and the name attached to it. Jesse Park had heard the name Harold Fitch in a specific context, a training brief given by a retired colonel at the Air Force Academy that Park had attended as a cadet, in which the colonel had spent 40 minutes on Wild Weasel doctrine and its origins, and had said at one point that Harold Fitch had done more to shape the threat suppression mission doctrine that modern SEAD aircraft, including the F-35, relied upon than almost any other single aviator in Air Force history. Park had written the name in the margin of his notebook and left it there. He looked at Osei. Osei was already standing up. They were at the gate when the Krarge pulled in. The plane had been on the ground 2 minutes when the forward door opened and Dara Simmons appeared, and behind her Harold Fitch, bag in hand, moving through the jetway with the unhurried pace he'd had since the moment he boarded. Kelsey was somewhere behind, in the shuffle of the rear cabin deplaning. But first, before the jetway, at 28,000 feet over the Tennessee hills on descent into Nashville, Captain Reed Mallory had picked up the cabin PA. The crackle of the interphone system brought the cabin to attention the way it always did, the small Pavlovian alertness of passengers waiting for weather or delays or the captain's usual cheerful nothing. What came instead was this, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain. I want to take a moment, and I don't do this often, to introduce you to someone on this aircraft. A pause. In seat 7B is Colonel Harold Fitch, United States Air Force. Retired, Colonel Fitch flew 105 combat missions in the F-105 Thunder Chief over North Vietnam as part of the Wild Weasel program. The Wild Weasel mission existed for one purpose, to fly directly at enemy missile batteries and draw their fire, so that other aircraft could operate more safely. Colonel Fitch was shot down twice and came back both times. He holds the Air Force Cross, the second highest military decoration this country awards its airmen. The voice on the PA paused again, and in the pause the cabin was absolutely silent. No rustling, no phones, no ambient noise of the kind that fills enclosed spaces. I'm a former F-16 pilot. Every threat suppression tactic I was ever taught traces its doctrine to the men who flew Wild Weasel in Vietnam. Men like Colonel Fitch. I wanted you to know who was sitting among you. Another pause. Colonel Fitch, on behalf of the crew, it is an honor to carry you today. The cabin did not produce the sound of individual reactions. It produced one sound, the collective, involuntary exhalation of 43 people receiving information that rearranged the last 45 minutes of their lives. Harold Fitch, in row 7, looked out the window at the Tennessee hills below, brown and bare in early March, the Cumberland River a gray thread in the valley distance. The whole landscape spread out the way it only looks from the air, flattened and clarified, the clutter of ground-level life resolved into simple shapes of field and tree and road. He had looked down at this country 10,000 times from the cockpit of aircraft that were trying to kill him, and it had always looked the same, patient, enormous, entirely indifferent to what was happening above it. He had always found that comforting. His expression did not change. His hands remained folded in his lap. From 12 rows back in seat 12C, there was no sound at all. At the gate, Jesse Park and Danny Osei were waiting at the end of the jetway when Harold came through. They were in flight suits, which was not standard for a terminal, but neither of them had stopped to change. Park stepped forward first. He saluted. Not the crisp ceremony salute of a formal occasion. Sharper than that, more personal than that. The kind of salute that comes from a specific place in a man and not from training alone. Osei stepped up beside him and did the same. Two F-35 pilots in flight suits in the Nashville International Jetway, saluting an 82-year-old man in a blue Oxford shirt carrying a small bag. The other passengers coming off the jetway slowed, then stopped, then parted around the moment the way water parts around something fixed. Harold looked at them both. Something moved behind those pale gray-blue eyes. Not surprise, not emotion in the demonstrative sense, but the particular quality of a man receiving something he had long ago stopped expecting. He returned the salute. "Sir," Park said, "Captain Jesse Park, Hun 58th Fighter Wing. I heard your name on the radio." He paused. "I learned Wild Weasel doctrine from a colonel who said Harold Fitch helped write it." Another pause. "I just wanted to say, everything I do up there, every seed mission, every threat suppression run, it stands on what your generation built. I wanted you to know that someone knows that." Harold looked at him for a long moment. "You fly the 35? he said. "Yes, sir," Harold nodded once, a slow nod. "Good aircraft?" Park almost smiled. "Getting better every day, sir." "Good," Harold said. He looked at both of them. "You take care of each other up there. That's the only thing that matters. The aircraft is a tool. The man next to you is irreplaceable." He held Park's gaze. "You understand me?" "Yes, sir," Harold nodded again. He patted Park once on the arm, a single, unhurried gesture, the way you acknowledge something that doesn't need more, and walked up the jetway into the terminal. Behind him, somewhere in the crowd of deplaning passengers, Brandon Kelsey moved through the terminal with his rolling carry-on and his expensive watch and did not look at anyone. It was 6 weeks later when Harold Fitch was at the gate in Charlotte again. Same Tuesday morning flight, same carge, same Dara Simmons working the cabin. Kelsey was there too. Same route, same schedule, whatever sales territory brought him through Charlotte on Tuesday mornings. He was in the boarding line, 2 people behind Harold. When Harold reached his row and settled into 7B, Kelsey filed past to 12C without a word, without a sideways look. He put his bag in the overhead, sat down, and stared at the seat back in front of him. At cruising altitude, he got up. He walked forward to row 7. He stood in the aisle. "Mr. Fitch," he said. Harold looked up. Kelsey held his boarding pass in both hands, the gesture of a man without props, without performance, without any of the instruments he usually carried. His voice was quiet, stripped of its sales floor confidence. "I want to apologize. I looked you up after that flight. I didn't know who you were." He paused. "I'm not sure that makes it better. But I wanted to say I'm sorry. For what I said. For the seat. For all of it." Harold looked at him the way he had looked at everything, with those still, high-altitude eyes, measuring weather. "Sit down a minute," he said, nodding at the middle seat. Kelsey sat. "You didn't need to know who I was," Harold said. The voice was the same dry, even rasp. "That's the thing people get wrong. It has nothing to do with who I was. You owe the same basic courtesy to every person in that line." He looked at Kelsey steadily. "But I appreciate that you said it. That takes something." He turned back to the window. Below them, Tennessee rolled past in its early spring green, the hills soft and rounded, the farms and towns spread across the valleys like things that had always been there and intended to stay. The world looked patient from up here. It looked like it had time. There are men who have looked down at this country from heights most people never reach. who have bled for the sky above it, who have come back from places that should not have allowed return, and they ride among us in middle seats on regional jets, unremarked, carrying the full weight of what they gave in total silence. They ask for nothing. They have never asked for anything. The least we can offer is the dignity of a seat. If you were moved by Harold's story of quiet courage and timeless wisdom, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.